Okay, are we ready? First, let me thank Rabbi Boaz for giving me the honor to share this evening with you. The 8th night of Hanukkah is a very special night, as we're going to see soon. When Rabbi Boaz made the blessings on the menorah, he said the second blessing was She'asa nisim la'avotenu b'yamim hahem bizman hazeh. Thanking God for making miracles in those days and today. So the topic that we're going to discuss is seeing miracles today in our lives. How do we tap into the miracles that are happening around us? Are there miracles? Well, we're going to see if we can find out. Tonight, the 8th night, the number 8 itself is the number of miracle, the number that transcends nature. And that's why tonight is the most special night of Hanukkah, because it incorporates all 8 days together in one last finale. And this number 8, as we know, nature is represented by the number 7. There's 7 days in the week, 7 continents, 7 metals, 7 firmaments. There are all kinds of 7s in creation, but when you go one step beyond creation, you're talking about the number 8. Right? That's why, as you know, the Brit Milah that a young baby gets is on the 8th day. Why? Because he starts a supernatural connection with God, something which transcends his mind. To be a Jew, you have to transcend nature. There's no other way to exist. So tonight is the 8th night, and therefore it's appropriate to talk about miracles and things that transcend nature. If you ask people, have you ever had a miracle happen to you? Most people will say no. Some people will say, yeah, 25 years ago, I was in a car accident and came out unhurt, unharmed. And people who went through the Holocaust saw miracles. Baruch Hashem, right? My father, he should be well, celebrated his 90th birthday 3 weeks ago. He escaped from a concentration camp with his father. But that was 75 years ago. Do we see miracles now? That's the question. People have a tendency, first of all, to be skeptical and to believe only what can be proven in a scientific laboratory. And people look at those who talk about miracles or supernatural things as being naive and not in touch with reality and so on. I met a guy recently, I'm from Jerusalem, so I met a guy who wore a kippah and had tzitzit. And he said something about his grandfather who had passed away, and I said, well, I hope we'll see him back soon with the resurrection of the dead. He looked at me and said, why, you believe that stuff? I said, you don't? So I said to him, the Talmud has 21 proofs for the resurrection of the dead. One of them is a logical proof. So I said, let me try the logical proof on this guy. The logical proof is that if God could create someone having never existed before, then certainly he could recreate him having existed once before. That's what it says in the Talmud. If you can create something out of nothing, certainly you can create something again out of something that already existed. He accepted. Okay? Baruch Hashem. Thank God. Then there's a girl we had as a student once who said, how do we know that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai? Now this girl, I know her, and she accepts theories, scientific theories from 10 million years ago, 20, 30 billion years ago, but something that happened only 3,300 years ago you can't accept. So I said to her, I have a friend, he's a big rabbi in Jerusalem, his father is the chief rabbi of Montreal, and on certain occasions when he gives a lecture, and people ask him, where did you know that from? What's the source for that information? He says it's from Mount Sinai. And he's not kidding, because he heard it from his father, who heard it from his father, who heard it from his father, all the way back to Mount Sinai. They have an unbroken tradition in their family. My wife's family traces itself, we have the family tree back to King David. That's not bad. How does any Cohen know he's a Cohen? Because his father told him, and his father told his his grandfather, and his great-grandfather told his grandfather, and so on. So once I put it in those terms, she accepted it also. There are actually people around who are carrying on the tradition from Mount Sinai that is a chain that's ongoing. That's not so hard to believe, right? So, let me just tell you the epitome of what I saw in skepticism. But it was in a textbook. It was a psychology textbook that someone left in our house once. We lived in the dormitory in a big school in Jerusalem for many years. And I looked at the textbook. It was written by two Jewish professors, one from Harvard and one from Brown. One's name was Kagan and one was Levine. One was a Cohen, one was a Levi. And in the psychology textbook, there was a chapter on statistics. So they said the following, that don't think that if someone has a dream one night, and in his dream, his brother is killed in a car accident, and the next day he gets a phone call, and his brother was killed in a car accident the next day. Don't think that this is anything supernatural, it says there. Oh no. This is pure statistics. That out of every 10,000 people, let's say, who have this dream, one of them is bound to be right. Right? That's what they wrote in the chapter on statistics. So I'm going to tell you a few things that I heard from people themselves. One, when I was here about 10, 12 years ago, there was a student in LBS, in the Lauder Business School. If I remember correctly, his name is Ron Tzach. I believe he was from Ra'anana. And he told me that one of the things that brought him closer to Judaism was that once he had a dream. He was living in Israel. And in the dream, he sees himself in a terrorist bombing in a restaurant in Tel Aviv. He sees all the details. He sees how the building is blown up, how people are being flung this way, that way, all the debris. And he sees himself walking out unharmed, unscathed. A few months later, he was in that terrorist attack. And he knew he'd be okay, because he saw already in the dream a few months earlier. And that's what happened. So I asked these two professors of psychology, is that just a statistic that out of every 10,000 people who have a dream that they're in a terrorist attack and they come out unharmed, one of them is bound to be right? Or is there something, as we say, the sages teach us that a dream is a part of prophecy? There's another story that happened once when we were dorm parents. There was a girl, unfortunately her brother was killed in a car accident in Muncie. And her parents were not alive, and that was her only living relative sibling. And we were given the unfortunate task of informing her of what happened to her brother. So my wife, as dorm mother, approached her, but discovered that, believe it or not, she had planned the same day to make a trip from Israel to New York to visit her brother. It was on Hanukkah, of all times. So my wife called back the relatives and said, look, she's coming anyway. So I don't think it's a good idea to tell her here. You receive her in New York and break the tragic news to her there. They said, good idea. We didn't say a word. We wished her have a safe trip. That night, 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on our door in the dormitory. Who was it? It was her. I said, Judy, what are you doing here? She said, I'm not going. She was on the plane. She was on the runway. And she felt in her heart that something happened to her brother. I'm not going there. I'm not going to face what happened. She came off the plane. She forced the stewardess to let her leave the plane. She came back to the dormitory room. Then, of course, we had to tell her the news, and she did go back for his funeral. But again, I asked these professors, what is this, a statistic, or is this something that transcends the natural order? Is it that every 10,000 people who walk off a plane, one of them is bound to be right? Or did she actually feel the connection to her brother on the other side of the world? In truth, if you look at the history of Chabad as a movement, for many generations until ours, we downplayed miracles. There was no emphasis on looking for miracles. They say in the times of the Maggid of Mezrich, the miracles, the wonders were rolling on the floor, and nobody bothered to bend down and pick them up. There was more of an interest in learning about godliness, about the mystical, but looking for miracles was not part of the repertoire. In fact, there's a famous joke that there was Hasidim who were traveling on a train, different types of Hasidim, and each was telling miracle stories about his rabbi. And then they turned to the Chabad Hasid, and they said, "No, you must have a miracle about your rabbi." So he said, "Yeah, I do. He gave me a blessing to succeed with my lumber yard, for my business. And what happened? And the lumber yard burned down. I lost my whole business." So they said, "So what's the miracle?" So he said, "The miracle is that he's still my Rebbe." In other words, I don't need to see open miracles to have a relationship with someone who can inspire me. Nevertheless, in our generation, things are a little bit different. There's a famous letter that the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote his father-in-law, saying how in our generation we must emphasize miracles. Because in our generation, as we saw already, people are skeptical, and they don't believe what's beyond their simple vision, what you can see in a test tube in a laboratory. So it's important for us to emphasize the idea of miracles in our day and age. Now, when it comes to Hanukkah, I'll just mention parenthetically, there's a famous question, which is, why do we celebrate 8 days? We should celebrate only 7. Why only 7? Because they found 1 day's supply of oil. And the miracle was that it burned for 8 days. But the first day was not a miracle. That was natural that it should burn. So this question was posed by the Beit Yosef, the authoritative figure in the Shulchan Aruch. And he has over 100 answers. We're not going to go through them all now. But one of the answers is that nature is also a miracle. And there's a famous incident in the Talmud where Hanina ben Dosa, his daughter, by mistake, put vinegar in for the Shabbos licht, for the Shabbos candles, instead of oil, olive oil. So she said, "Oh, Papa, I made a terrible mistake." So he said to her, "Just leave the vinegar. The one that decreed that olive oil will burn will decree that the vinegar should burn." And that's what they did. They lit their Shabbos lights with vinegar. So that's one of the things that we often take for granted, is that nature is also miraculous. The birth of a child is not a miracle. When you plant a seed in the ground, and from that one seed comes a huge tree that has millions of seeds, it's not miraculous, right? The Rebbe once said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, that a miracle can be viewed as nature that happens only once. And nature can be viewed as a miracle that happens constantly. Right? It's all relative. I'll give you an example. If Kriyat Yam Suf, the splitting of the Red Sea, was considered a miracle, I think most people would agree. Right? The whole sea splits, so that's a few million people pass, and then it comes back and rejoins. Now what would happen if the sea would split every morning at 5 a.m. from that day on? Right? Every single morning, 5 a.m., the Red Sea splits and then goes back. Would that be a miracle? It's nature. It's maybe, at best, it's one of the natural wonders. But it's nature. But they call it a natural wonder. Right? So what I want to do is take a look at some of the things in nature and see how much it really is taken for granted and not seen as a miracle. But I want to just point out, if you look at the sheets that I gave out, I say on the side that says a closer look at our prayers. So number 1, we say the Modim prayer every day and a few times a day. And in it we thank God for your miracles, which are with us daily, and for your continual wonders. Meaning that there are wonders that are going on all the time. So I want to take a look at the universe first. I'm not a scientist, but I dabble a little bit. Ice, does it float or does it sink when you put it in a cup of water? It floats. And there's a rule scientifically that anything which is more dense than water should sink. But ice is an exception, and scientists cannot explain why. But it goes to the top. Now, what would be the ramification if ice would sink and not float in our water? Believe it or not, the world would not be able to exist. Why? Because all the seas, when they freeze, or all the bodies of water that become frozen, the ice rises to the top, creates a warm layer which preserves life in the sea underneath. If the ice would sink, all these bodies of water would become frozen and all life would become extinct in the bodies of water. Now it happens that our oxygen comes from the bodies of water and from plants. They produce the oxygen that we breathe. So we wouldn't have enough oxygen to breathe, right? So just a simple fact in nature shows us that it's not just so natural. It's something which is a little bit mind-boggling. I can go on for a few hours with this because it's sort of a hobby, but I'll give you two more examples. There's the cosmological constant, which is discovered by Einstein in the late 40s. What is this constant? This is an anti-gravitational force which counters gravity. In other words, to keep gravity in check, there's an anti-gravity force. Now, how is it measured? So Einstein measured it as a point, 122 zeros, and then the number 2 at the end. Right? Point 0.00000 until 122, and then the number 2. Now they asked a world-renowned physicist who's in California today, probably the biggest in America, Leonard Susskind. It's his name. Jewish boy. His father was a plumber in Brooklyn. And they asked him, how do you explain such a precise counter-gravitational force? How do you explain it? Now, just to show you what the question really is, if this anti-gravitational force would be a little stronger, then what would happen is gravity would not hold things down and the world would expand and disappear. If the force was a bit weaker, in other words, if it was 0.00122 times 1 at the end, then the gravity would be too strong and the world would implode, it would collapse within itself. So this little subtle cosmological constant, is what it's called, is keeping the world intact. So they asked this world-renowned physicist, he's the inventor of string theory in physics, and his first answer was God. Now that itself is a miracle. For a physicist to use the word God, it's never happened before. But that was his first answer. Right? Then he gave other answers which are a little bit ridiculous, that actually this constant was different in other worlds, that it just didn't work out and they destroyed. But in this world it happens to work, etc. But these are examples, if you look around the universe. By the way, I'm just going to point out that science is aware of only 5% of the universe. 95% of the universe is called black energy, dark energy, and dark matter. 70% is dark energy, which was discovered by a Jewish fellow, Sal Perlmutter, and 25% is what we call dark matter, discovered by a woman, an observant Jewish woman named Vera Rubin from Pennsylvania. So we're only observing 5% of the universe. So, nevertheless, I'm going to quote you something that Max Planck once said, a famous physicist from Germany. Max Planck in 1944 says, "As a man who has examined matter all his life, I can say there is no matter as such. All matter only exists because an intelligent force creates it all." That was a quote from Max Planck. Now, that's the universe. But let's take a look at the human body. The human body has different parts, different functions, right? We have the liver. The liver, it's interesting because in Hebrew the liver is called a kaved, which means heavy. And perhaps it's because it's the heaviest organ in the body. It weighs 1.5 kilograms. And it has how many functions, how many jobs do you think the liver performs? Over 500. Right? Among them, it produces 100 enzymes, not 100, 1,000 enzymes for the body. It detoxifies the blood. If a person drinks coffee, and the coffee would go straight into the arteries leading to heart, he would die. Because caffeine is poison for the heart. Before it gets to the heart, the liver, within 6 to 10 seconds, removes the caffeine. It detoxifies, takes away all the poisons from the blood, warms the blood, and it provides a certain thing that causes blood clotting when the blood hits, is exposed to the air, and so on. It has 500 jobs. The heart pumps non-stop, 100,000 times a day approximately. The heart will contract. The heart every minute circulates all the blood in the body, through the entire body. And it reaches all the capillaries in the body. The capillaries within the human body, if stretched out, would go 2.5 times around the world. Right? These are all just simple facts. If you study any part of the body, you would see that there's magnificent things going on right within ourselves. That's perhaps why the word for health in Hebrew, briut, is from the word bria, from the word creation. When we realize what creation is and how we are in our true created state, that's when we're healthy. I just want to take a quick look now at the page that I gave you, where it says number 3, Nishmat Kol Chai. Right? This is a prayer that we say every Shabbat morning. And I'll just preface it. You'll see what it has to do with the human body. I'll preface it with something that happened once in the house of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There was a plumber who came to fix something in the Rebbe's house. This plumber was a Belzer Chassid. And his friends threatened him, if the Rebbe's at home and you don't walk away with some idea, if you don't ask him to tell you over some idea, then we're going to kill you. So sure enough, he was in the Rebbe's home and the Rebbe was there. And he told the Rebbe what his friends had said, and the Rebbe said, well, if your life is in danger, I better tell you something then. So this is what the Rebbe told him. That if you look at this prayer, right, at the words, it says, where I underlined, even if our mouth was filled with song, as the sea is full of water, and our tongue with joyous melody as the roar of its waves, and our lips with praise as the breath of the skies. If our eyes were radiant like the sun and the moon, our hands outspread as the eagles in the heavens, and we were light-footed as the deer, we would still not be able to thank you and bless your name. In other words, even if the parts of our body were so expansive and had so much depth and breadth and ability, we wouldn't be able to thank you even for one of the favors that you do, which are innumerable. Then if you look at the end of this section, in the continuation it says, therefore, the limbs you have arranged within us, the spirit and soul you have breathed into our nostrils, and the tongue you placed in our mouth, they all shall thank, bless, praise, glorify, exalt, revere, etc., and proclaim the sovereignty of your name, our King. You notice a seeming contradiction here? In the beginning we said that our limbs would not be able to not praise you for even one thing you do. And at the end we say, and therefore, those limbs you gave us, they will praise you, extol you, bless you, and so on. So the Rebbe asked this question, and the Rebbe answered with a mashal, with a parable. The parable was that a person once did a favor for a king. So the king wanted to pay him for his favor. So he gave him a gift, sent him a beautiful gift. Many years later, the king did a favor for him. And now the guy wants to know, what should I get the king? What should I give him as a gift to show him my gratitude? So after thinking for a long time, he decided, the only thing I can give him is what he gave me. Because that I know is according to royal taste. He picked that out himself, then he can't argue. He can't not accept that because it was good for him to choose. So he gives back to the king what the king originally gave him. Says the Rebbe, that's what's going on here. When you look at the words in the beginning, it says, even if our mouth was filled with song, our lips, our eyes, if we're talking about our limbs and our parts of the body, they are not capable of truly appreciating God because we are finite beings. But the moment we realize that these parts of our body really belong to you, God, that's why if you look at the words at the end, it says, therefore the limbs you have arranged within us, the spirit and the soul that you breathed into our nostrils, the tongue that you placed in our mouth, they shall all thank, bless, and praise and glorify. In other words, the more we realize how the human body is a miracle and how God is creating us with infinite capacity and how all the parts of the body defy what normal scientists can do even. The sages in the Talmud said if all the scientists would get together in the world, they would not be able to reproduce a mosquito or a gnat. Right? You look at the heart. The heart is a muscle that never gets tired. If you would contract your fist 70 times a minute, right, and do this for 24 hours a day, you wouldn't be able to. Scientifically, it's as if a person would lift a 14-pound weight 5 feet up, above his head every minute, non-stop, his whole life, not possible. The biggest muscle builders would tire out after a few hours, but the heart keeps pumping, the heart keeps going, etc. So we looked a little bit at the universe, we looked at the human body. Now let's take a look at technology, right? Technology is another area where we see miracles, right? The bomb, by the way, that destroyed Hiroshima, how much energy, matter, was in that bomb? Anybody know? It was the amount of matter that you could fit on the pin, the head of a needle. That's how much matter was converted into energy. Nowadays, there's a whole field of technology called nanotechnology, which is technology of very small, minute. In Israel, in the Technion, they carved the entire Tanakh, the 24 books of the Tanakh, in a stone. They engraved it with all the words and all the vowels, and it fits on the top of a matchstick. That's technology is doing unbelievable things. I remember I saw once the longest operation in terms of who was operating and where the operated person was in distance was a person who had his gallbladder removed in France by a surgeon who did it from New York through a computer, right? Imagine calling your son in New York and saying, do me a favor, scratch my back. Right? In Vienna, I can't reach it. Right? And he gets on his computer and these are miracles, right? The fact, even thinking now, the fact that I'm here tonight, and I'm going to be in Jerusalem, God willing, tomorrow morning, and people there will not have known that I was in Europe overnight. That's a miracle, right? You get on a plane, you're in a different country one night, next morning, back, right? But it's much more than that. Now, people that have, let's say, all kinds of handicaps are overcoming them with technology. People who were mute, who couldn't be heard, who couldn't pronounce the words, now there's special telephones that interpret their sounds into words. They can have a regular conversation on the phone with someone. Because that technology deciphers what they're saying and puts it into words. Right? People that had all kinds of handicaps. There's certain people, unfortunately, that can only move their eyes, and they still have productive lives. I know one person in Lud, in Israel, who's a composer, music composer. He can basically only move his eyes, but he uses that to compose his music through a computer, and he has a full schedule from 6:30 in the morning to late at night. He counsels people, he puts out albums, And he's doing this all with his eyes. These are miraculous things, right? Let alone all the things that they do now with cataract removal, which is a 20-minute operation now, which give people back their eyesight and so on. Now, sometimes you're going to question that sometimes things don't seem to work, though. You know, you don't see, we're talking about miracles, we're talking about miraculous things, but people are going through challenges, right? There are a lot of difficulties that people face. And not everything is so rosy. But what is the Hebrew word for a test or a challenge in life? Nisayon. Now, what's the root of the word for test? In Hebrew, nisayon, it's the word nes. Why? Because every challenge in life forces you to transcend your own nature. You have to rise above your nature, and that's what these people are doing. Right? There are many people. You can find on YouTube today all kinds of stories of people who have remarkably overcome all kinds of limitations in their own lives. There's one of the fastest runners in the world is a fellow named Oscar Pistorius from South Africa. I think he's in jail. He's not running too much now, but this fellow was disqualified from the Olympics, and he has no feet from his knee down. Right? And he's one of the fastest runners in the world. So if you would tell me 50 years ago a person with no feet can be the fastest runner in the world, I wouldn't know what you're talking about. Right? There are people today that, in Israel, I know of two people. One is the champion golfer for the blind, and one is the champion bowler for the blind. Now this guy who's a champion bowler, his average score is 120. I couldn't get that. So there are all kinds of tests which are causing people to sort of rise above their nature and transcend who they are. That's also a miracle. Right? There's a guy you can find on YouTube named Alvin Law. He's a guy who has no arms. He's an excellent drummer. He does with his feet. He's a fully functional person with no arms. And he's overcome. Right? That's a nace. That's a miracle. Elie Wiesel, I remember once in one of his books, he says, in the book called Night, that he was on the death march. And he had a very badly injured leg, and he couldn't walk. But the people there told him, you have no choice. If you don't walk, you're dead. They're going to kill you. So he started walking, and that leg was not really capable of walking, but it started walking. And eventually he made the entire death march with a leg that wasn't capable of walking. And he said in the book that his soul simply took over for his body. That's what a miracle is, when the spiritual element overcomes the physical limitation. Now this is not only in physical matters. I can say that there are miracles also in behavior. If a person by nature is an angry person, very agitated, and he overcomes his nature and becomes a refined person who's patient, that's a miracle. Right? And there are all kinds of interesting things that I noticed going back to 1990, when the Rebbe had his first satellite around the world Hanukkah lighting in different countries. So the person in charge of Moscow was a friend of mine, Betzalel Schiff, and in order to light the menorah outside the Kremlin in Red Square, they needed a very tall building to put the disc on the roof so that the event could be televised around the world, and the only building that was suitable was the KGB building. So the KGB said, fine. So 1990, the world satellite from Moscow was televised from the KGB roof, right? That's not a miracle. 7 years ago, the president of Russia came to Israel for a visit. He came to the Kotel, to the Western Wall. And on his way back, when he retreated from the wall, there was a Russian immigrant to Israel who was a Baal Shuv of Breslover. And he called out to Putin from the side in Russian. So Putin right away made a dash over there. He hears a Russian voice in Israel. he goes over and he has a conversation with this fellow. And the fellow, he was asked, what's life like in Israel and how you're adapting and so on. And then he asked Putin, tell me, what did you pray for at the wall? What was your request? So what did he answer? I prayed for the restoration of the third Beit HaMikdash. Can you imagine Stalin coming to Jerusalem and asking for the Beit HaMikdash? But we've come a long way. The person who generates joy is actually a verse in the book of Proverbs, which says, a man's joy will cancel his illness, but who can lift a broken spirit? In other words, and this is the way the Vilna Gaon explains it, that if a person is besimcha, if he's truly in a state of joy, he can overcome any illness with that joy. And that's why we know now we have laughter therapy and medical clowns and all kinds of therapies. The famous story with Norman Cousins, who spent 3 days in a motel watching jokes, and then he got out of his cancer for that. So this is also a tested way of changing one's natural state through states of joy. Prayer, of course, there are studies that show that different groups of people who were sick, some who were prayed for and some who weren't, the ones who were prayed for recovered much earlier. That was done in Kansas City in America, and was done in Israel, right? I'll just give you 2 examples. My wife and I, we were born in the same hospital in New York City, 3 months apart. But we met in Jerusalem 27 years later. But my wife went to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, 40 days straight. There's a Jerusalem, what's called a skula. It's a kind of charm, which if you go to the Kotel and ask for one thing for 40 days in a row, you're guaranteed to get it. So she went for 40 days, and the following night is when we met for the first time. Now, she didn't tell me that until after we were engaged. She didn't want to. But I did it once for someone else, someone who was framed by the FBI. It's a long story. He called me and begged me to go to the Kotel for 40 days. And he was, the case against him was so like airtight that he was hoping to reduce the sentence from 10 years to 5 years. That's how dismal the chances were. So I said, help another Jew. I went for 40 days straight. Wasn't easy. From where I lived, it was an hour and 20 minutes on Shabbat to walk there. But nevertheless, soon after I did it, they were waiting for the final trial. And the lawyer of this fellow, the lawyer was listening to the evidence for the 100th time. And the evidence was on a long reel, like one of these long cassettes that they used to have, a 2-hour reel where they were secretly recording the conversation between the FBI agents and this defendant. He was a Jew who was a very charitable person, who's the president of a Chabad community in America. Now, he fell asleep, the lawyer. He fell asleep listening to it. And he was the night before the final trial, and he was woken up about a half hour later by the voices that came back onto the tape. Now, it's one of these long 2-hour reels, and after it had stopped, it was empty for about a half hour, and then the voices came back on. What happened was the FBI agents were taping themselves. They didn't realize it. And in that part that no one ever heard, they were saying a lot of anti-Semitic things. We're going to get that Jew, we're going to bury him, we're going to get him out of his business and whatever. And it woke up the lawyer out of his sleep. And he said, wait a minute, this evidence, nobody heard this. So he took it to the court the next day. He said to the judge, with your honor, with permission of the court, I would like to ask one question. Does this case have any anti-Semitic bearing to it? And the judge said, for sure not. We're here for justice in the American way. So he says, with the permission of the court, I would like to play some new evidence that was never played before. He played that part of the tape. They dismissed all 10 charges. Wow. Right? He got out. So prayer can help. By the way, it happens to be tonight. It's 1 year since Rabbi Rubashkin was pardoned by the President of America. It was the 8th night of Hanukkah. And he said when he was released, he said the day before he lost his last appeal. And there was no chance of him ever getting out of jail for 27 years. And that's when he started to believe that God can help him. And the next day the President pardoned him. Right? Anyway, we're not going to go into that. But prayer, the power of prayer. I once studied with a rabbi in the north of Israel, and Rabbi Bullman was his name, Nachman Bullman. And a woman came to him and asked for a blessing for children. So the rabbi said, look, I'm not a Hasidic Rebbe, I don't give blessings. But I'll tell you what you can do. I have a daughter who's been married for 14 years without children. You don't have children for many years? I'll give you her name, and I'll give her your name, and you'll pray for each other. Right? That year, the very same year, they both had children, not only the same week, one had a boy, one had a girl, but the same day, not only the same day, but the same hour. Not only the same hour, but the families are convinced it was the same minute. And I know one of the families. That's where I heard it from. So they were both praying for each other, and they were both answered. Power of speech, right? I used to give a class once a week south of Hebron in a place called Susia. So the driver I had was a very interesting character. I realized that my class there was more for him to hear than for the people there, because he demanded every way back and forth that I give him a whole lecture. And then he told me what was his story. This fellow, his name is Dror Avrahami. He was 26 years old at the time. He had just recovered from cancer. He had such a serious bout with cancer. He had reached 3 out of 4 stages already. And they were already giving him social workers to explain to him what death was about. And that's it, the doctors had given up. Finally, his mother's uncle showed up. Now this guy is not an observant person, but father's uncle is a Makubal, Rabbi Mansour, famous Makubal in Yerushalayim. He comes, he holds his hand, he tells me, he looks at him and says, Dror, Hashem loves you. He's not ready to take you back. Have a good day. He left. That one sentence made such an impact on him. He dismissed the social workers. He stopped the treatments. He left the hospital and he's fine. Just one word, one sentence made. I'm not saying that that's what people should do, but he was my driver. I heard it from him personally. In other words, you never know what a word, how that can impact a person. To give them a whole new lease on life, right? I know someone, there's a famous rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Mendel Futterfass, a famous chassid, Lubavitcher chassid. And he heard of a friend of his who was in jail in Siberia. And he was waning away. And he was in a cell for a number of years and he didn't have any hope. So he was thinking all this time, Rabbi Mendel, what can I do to lift his spirits? So what did he do? He found the blueprint from the city planning of the sewage system. Which pipes ran underneath the prison? And Rabbi Mendel crawled through the pipes to get to this fellow's cell. And he called up from the drain pipe, Binyamin, are you there? And this prisoner bends down to the drain pipe and says, who's in there? He says, it's Mendel. Are you there? He says, I'm here. He says, are you happy? He thinks to himself, am I happy? I guess I'm happy, yeah. Okay, sei gesund. And then he leaves. And years later, he meets this Binyamin character when he got out of jail, and he tells him that saved my life. because I was in such low spirits, but the fact that you came and just said that one sentence to me, the effort that you made to come and ask if I'm happy, just lifted my spirits enough to hold on until I was finally released. So the power of the word is clearly something that can change reality. Then you have Torah and halachic rulings. The power of Torah, a halachic ruling. There was a rabbi in Yerushalayim called Shimon the Tzaddik, passed away about 5 years ago. He used to help people by making a beit din, and they would rule to solve the problem the person had. The one case that I know of, there was a boy who couldn't sleep at night. So the father was at a loss. What can I do? The four-year-old boy cannot sleep at night. He's a wreck. So they brought him to Shimon HaTzadik. His last name was Friedman. Shimon HaTzadik Friedman. And he made a beit din. He made a rabbinical group of 3 rabbis. And he had the beit din rule that the Torah authority rules that this boy has to sleep. And we shall say together with him the bracha, the blessing you say before you fall asleep, Hamapiu, without Hashem's name. From that night on, the boy slept like a child is supposed to sleep. That's the power of the Torah that can change reality according to the time of the Tzemach Tzedek. There was a man who had a defect in his lung. And they came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Rebbe, we need a blessing. The doctors don't give him much time to live. So the Tzemach Tzedek said that according to the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, it's not considered a defect. But he's the authority in Israel. And that's where his ruling has influence. So if you move to Israel, your husband will be okay. Because that's not going to harm him. So they moved to Israel and he lived for many years. You see that the Torah has an effect on reality. Performing a mitzvah, right? Number 6. In fact, the Rambam goes as far as to say, in the laws of tshuva, that every person should look at the world as evenly balanced between good and bad. And the next mitzvah that I do is going to tip the scales of the entire world towards good and bring the salvation for mankind. That's how powerful a single mitzvah can be. Now we know that the mitzvot are 248 positive and 365 negative. And they correspond to the different parts of the body. Altogether, we're told there's 613 body parts. It's interesting, by the way, that I know someone who practices Chinese medicine. He learned it in China. And the teacher he had in China said to him, there are 365 negative points in the body and 248 positive points in the body. So he says to this Chinese mentor, are you sure it's not 249 and 364? Or maybe it's 366 and 247? He said, no. This is our tradition. Exactly the number of positive and negative mitzvot that we have. So a few years ago, I heard this also from the Chabad emissary in Vinnytsia, in the Ukraine. So there was a fellow there who was 40 years old, who had a very advanced case of cancer, and the doctors gave up hope. And he was coming closer to Judaism, and he decided he wanted to do a Brit Milah. So the shliach couldn't find anyone who was willing to do it for him there because the risk medically was too dangerous. So he called Rabbi Führer. In Israel, there's a famous medical consultant, Rabbi Elimelech Führer. He's world-renowned. He's an expert in all kinds of fields of medicine, and he refers people to doctors. He arranged for this fellow to come to Israel, found the right doctors, and oversaw the whole process, and he had his bris done in Israel. Soon after he had done his bris, the cancer disappeared. I heard this from the shliach. He did one mitzvah, and that's it. His life changed. Right? You call the shliach there, Horowitz, if you want. It was actually a few years ago, it was in one of the conventions for the Chabad emissaries around the world, there was a speaker who talked about an 8-year-old boy from Argentina who had also been diagnosed with cancer, and the doctors gave up hope, and his parents had money, and they decided to give the boy as good a time as possible while he was still alive. So they took him around the world, and each place that they went, they met the best doctors in each area. to ask, maybe there's another approach, maybe there's another method, or maybe some doctor has more expertise that could try to solve their problem. So when they happened to be in New York, they were in Manhattan at a cancer specialist, and they came down from the building, and they were in the street in Manhattan, and they were met by some young men from Chabad who were offering them to put on tefillin. So while they were talking, they asked, "What are you doing here? You're here on vacation?" They said, "Well, not exactly. Our son is very ill, and we are giving him his last sort of hurrah." So they said, "Why don't you take him to get a blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe? So he knows how to get people out of these kind of predicaments." So they decided to go. And when they went, they met with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe suggested that they keep kosher, that they should from now on only eat kosher food. The mother was furious. She came out, she was furious. "I came for medical advice, and you're telling me about kashrut, about Judaism. I thought he was a medical expert." But the boy insisted, right? And after all, he's the one who's suffering. He insisted that from then on they tried to eat kosher. So the family adopted kashrut. And lo and behold, the cancer left. Said the shliach at the convention, "And if you're wondering whatever happened to that boy, it's me." He says, "I'm the boy."
Wow.
He's a shliach in Argentina today. So again, the power of a mitzvah can change reality. Then we have at the end of the Gemara Masechet Shabbat, changing one's behavior, one's name, one's location. These are all things that can change a person's mazal, right? Generally, a person is under the influence of stars, but he can change that influence by changing his behavior, his name, or his location. You have self-sacrifice, going against one's nature. Generally, when God sees that you go against your nature, He changes nature for you also, right? In other words, we wonder, how can trust in God work? How can bitachon work? Basically, the simplest explanation that when you have factors in life that are very difficult and would cause you to worry and make you not so happy, and you rise above those factors, and you're happy nevertheless, and you have confidence and trust that God will make things work out, then it's like measure for measure. You went against nature by not letting those factors harm you or ruin your spirit. So God, who created those factors, can remove them just the same. Right? Joining together with others is a very powerful thing that can create a new reality. This I saw once because the Rebbe used to see people individually and then change to group audiences. So one fellow wanted to complain to the Rebbe how it's not fair that we can't speak to you privately anymore. We have to come as a group. So he figured the next time there's a group audience, he'll come, and he'll be the last one in the group to leave, and he'll complain to the Rebbe. But, lo and behold, before he got his chance to complain, there was one guy before him who held onto the Rebbe's table and said, "Rebbe, I want to have a child. I never had a child, we're childless." So the Rebbe gave him a bracha, said, "I give you a bracha." So the guy said, "No, Rebbe, I don't want just a blessing, I want a promise." So he says to the Rebbe, a little bit audacity, but he's holding the table that the Rebbe's sitting at, and he says, "I'm not letting go of the table until the Rebbe promises I'm going to have a child." So the Rebbe looked at him very seriously and says, "I promise you." Then he lets go, and he goes his way, and the last guy comes to complain about the fact that we can't speak to the Rebbe individually anymore. So the Rebbe looks at him before he even opens his mouth and says, "You see the power of having a group audience? The guy who just came before you, I couldn't have promised him a child if he had been by me by himself. But because he came as part of a group, I can use the collective merit of everyone else together to give him the child that he wanted." So that's the power of joining together as a group. This gives us everybody's merit comes together. Then you have generating one's will, right? This famous thing, there's nothing that stands in the way of a person's will. That's from the Zohar. If a person has a strong enough will, he'll see the results that he wants. And even medically, it's been proven that people, their will is the main determinant of their recovery. The blessing of a tzaddik, going to a righteous person, says in the Talmud that if one has an ill member in the family, he should ask a chacham, a tzaddik, to pray on his behalf. What's the idea? The Jewish people is like one body. And as such, each person takes a different limb, a different part of the body. Some people are more the heart, some people are more doers. But the tzaddik is like the head of the body. Now, if I had to pick one part of the body to express the needs of the body better than any other, it would be the head. So if I go to the head, he's going to channel the blessing that I need to change what I need in reality. Number 12, invoking the merit of our ancestors. We also have zchut avot. We have things that we can use from our past to help us change the present. There's a famous story of the Bluzhever Rebbe. It was one of the famous figures in the Holocaust. There's a book called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, which is mostly stories about him. The first story in the book, Israel Spira. The first story in the book is how he was lined up with a bunch of inmates by the Nazis. And they were told that there's a pit right in front of you. If you can jump over to the other side, then you will live. And if you can't, then this is where you'll meet your death. This will be your grave. He was standing there with a fellow inmate who actually was not a big believer, but they became very close in the camp. And the other person said to the Rebbe, what are we going to do? It's impossible. Humanly, we cannot jump over this pit. So said the Bluzhever Rebbe, all we have to do is close our eyes and try. And the rest is up to God. So they closed their eyes, they held on to each other, and they jumped. And when they opened their eyes, they found themselves on the other side of the pit. So the Bluzhever Rebbe turns to his fellow inmate and says, how I got to this side of the pit, I know. Because when I closed my eyes and I jumped, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather extended their hands from heaven and pulled me over. But how did you get here? In what merit did you get here? So he looked at the Bluzhever and said, Rebbe, because I believed in you. Right? But again, these are miracles. Then you have the power of a Hasidic Verbrengen. Right? There's a famous saying that more than the angel Michael can do, a Hasidic Verbrengen can do. Meaning that when people get together and they discuss matters in life and they try to improve, and they do it through the medium of nigun, like violinists, and they sing Hasidic nigunim and they drink a l'chaim, they can change their lives. Right? This is something that happened in the time of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe when he taught his followers that they should bless each other, because the power of the Verbrengen is to effectively bless each other and allow the influence of those blessings, even among the Hasidim themselves, to change the person's fate. There's a famous episode that happened with Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Shmuel. In his time, there was a Chassid who didn't have children for many years. He kept asking the Rebbe for a bracha for a child, and the Rebbe always turned the conversation to something else. So he saw that the Rebbe wasn't able to bless him. Then, one day they were having a Verbrengen. They were having a gathering in their house, and the Hasidim were sitting and having a Verbrengen, and they ran out of vodka. There was no more l'chaims. So they turned to the wife, the hostess, and said, is there any more vodka? She said, yeah, but I'm hiding it. And I'll only take it out if you all give me a blessing for a child. So for vodka, what won't a chassid do to have some more l'chaims? So they said, sure, we give you a blessing that you should have a child this year, and so on. After a few months, she was expecting. And thank God she had her first healthy child, and so on. So her husband was perplexed. How could it be that the Verbrengen worked to give him the child, but the Rebbe himself couldn't give me a blessing? So he went back to the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe, doesn't make sense. So the Rebbe said, look, every person has three pipelines in his life. Pipeline of health, pipeline of parnasa, livelihood, and the pipeline of children, family. I saw in the pipeline for your children, you weren't meant to have any. I could have arranged for you to have a child, but it would have been at the expense of one of the other two pipelines. I would have had to take in either your livelihood or your health. I didn't want to do that to you. But what a Hasidic Farbrengen can do, even the angel Michael cannot do. And the Farbrengen provides you with a whole new pipeline that you didn't have before. So now you'll have the child, you'll have your health, and you'll have your livelihood. That's the power of Farbrengen. And finally, the power of telling a Hasidic story can actually change reality. Similar to how we tell the story of leaving Egypt on the night of the Seder. And we're reliving, reactivating the same energy that enabled us to leave Egypt in those days, helps us leave the confinements of our life in our day and age. That's the power of a Hasidic story. I'm just going to tell you two examples, and with that we'll end. One example, there's Rebbetzin Heller, famous teacher in Jerusalem, who told me the following, that she was in a family, this is going back about 25 years, a little bit less. She was in a family in a settlement called Yisodot in Israel. And she and her husband went there for Shabbat, and they noticed that the hostess wasn't coming to the meals. So they asked the husband, what's the matter? How come she's not coming to the table? He said, well, you're not going to believe it, but she came down with a very rare eye disease, which she had 5 years ago, and it just came back today. And this eye disease, this problem, caused the cornea to dry up, and she lost her eyesight. So they felt terrible, and Rebbetzin Heller took over the chores, and she was serving the food, and she was trying to fill in for the balabusta. But then, as Shabbos went on, the hostess felt compelled to at least join the table and explain what happened to her 5 years earlier, which came back that same day. So she said the following, 5 years ago, I lost my eyesight. I had this very rare eye problem. My husband went to many doctors in Israel. None of them could solve the problem. They didn't know what to do. There was not enough research in this area. So my husband got on a plane. He went into New York, went to America, looking if the research there was any more advanced. And to his dismay, the doctors there also were not able to find a solution to her problem. Before he came back, he was in New York anyway. He figured, Lubavitcher Rebbe is here. Let me ask him for a blessing. Comes to the Rebbe's office and asks if he could enter. Secretary said, no, the Rebbe is too busy. He doesn't see people individually now. He'll have to wait, maybe on Sunday when he gives out dollars. He said, I can't wait. My wife needs me. She has a terrible problem. We're in a big predicament and so on. So finally he found a way to get in. He had some protection, as they say. His grandfather helped the previous Rebbe escape at one point in his flight from Russia. So they let him go in. And they said, just don't waste the Rebbe's time. Tell him what you need right away. So she's telling this story to Mrs. Heller of what happened 5 years earlier. The Rebbe looked at the note that he wrote and said, don't worry, by the time you get back to Israel, everything will be fine. And sure enough, he got on the plane, he came back to Israel, and he found his wife was able to see again. When she finished telling the story again, 5 years later, her eyesight came back. Mrs. Heller was sitting there and saw it happen. And she sees fine since then. That is the power of a Hasidic story. You're telling a story that happened, but you're reactivating the energy right now. And her eyesight came back. And one final story, which happened on Hanukkah, going back 6 years. There's a Chabad Shliach, an emissary, in Great Neck, Long Island, in New York. He's originally from Israel. His name is Yosef Yitzchak Gaisinski. 6 years ago, on the 5th night of Hanukkah, his son found him unconscious in the house, lying on the floor. He had a heart attack. And his son, 8-year-old boy, was smart enough to call the ambulance. until the ambulance came and tried to give him shock treatment and revive him. Altogether, it was about 45 minutes that he was without a pulse. They took him to the hospital in the meantime, and there the doctors gave up, except that there was one doctor who was a friend of the family. And he said, if I don't try my utmost, they'll never forgive me. So he kept trying to give him electric shock. At one point, he felt his pulse come back, and the other doctors were laughing. They said, that's not his pulse, that's your pulse. You're so excited that you're feeling your own pulse. In short, he kept doing it and doing it until he did get a pulse. And finally, he got him breathing again. And he was in a coma. This rabbi, he's the rabbi of the Chabad community in Great Neck for the Persian Jews. Very big, community. And turns out, in the 2 weeks or so he was in a coma, he had a court case up there. And first, before they started the court case, they offered him, this is what he says when he came back out of his coma. They offered him a grand tour of what's going on up there. He could visit the chamber of the Baal Shem Tov if he wanted, the Maggid of Mezrich, the Alter Rebbe, and so on, and he did. Then they called him back to the court case. And they said, look, according to our records, you finished your job down below. And he said, what do you mean? I'm in the middle of building a $15 million Chabad house, right? And I have still a lot to do. So they said, is there anyone here who can testify that they need you down there? At that moment, the Lubavitch Rebbe walked into the courtroom and said, I need him down there. He's my shliach. He still hasn't finished his work. So they agreed to send him back, right? Now, I know a lot of details in this story simply because 2 years ago, I was in Crown Heights for Tishrei for the first month, and I spent a number of meals with Gaisinski's lawyer, best friend, and chavruta, his learning partner. His name is David Yerushalmi. Every time I met him at a meal, I said, tell me the story again. Because every time he kept telling me new details, which nobody knew. So, at one point he told me the following. They had decided above that he can come back into this world, but how did he actually get pulled down? He had a nurse, a Russian Jewish lady in a hospital, who said to the family, I have an old tradition in my family, that if someone is in a coma and you want to wake him up, call him by a nickname that he had when he was a kid. So what was his nickname? She asked the family. So they told her, Yoske, right, from Yosef. She started calling him Yoske. He woke up right away. And he was attached to all kinds of machines, and he asked for a pen and paper, and he couldn't talk because he had a respirator and so on. And he wrote on a piece of paper one word with a question mark. The word was Chabad, question mark. In other words, what's with my Chabad house? That's what happened as soon as he woke up. That's a real shliach, right? He didn't ask, have you water? How's the stock market? Chabad, question mark. Okay, now the doctor said he came back to life, no brain damage, but his kidneys were affected. He's going to need dialysis. So he said, I'm not doing dialysis. It makes you tired, it wears you out. I'm a Chabad shliach, I have to be active. His wife said, the doctors, you have to listen to them. That night, the Rebbe came to in a dream to him and said, you don't have to worry about the dialysis. The next day, they did tests on his kidneys and they were fine. Okay, that's the story that happened with Gasinski about 6 years ago, that I heard from his friend. I usually, if you notice, most of the stories I said tonight are first-hand, from people that I heard them or that I knew. Because then I know that everything is true there. But, let me tell you why I'm telling you this story. It has to do with Hanukkah. But, 2 years ago, after I heard all these details in his story from Yerushalmi, a woman comes over to me a few weeks later, and she catches me in the hall where I teach in Jerusalem in our school, and she says, Rabbi Appell, I need your help. My sister-in-law is in a coma. The doctors have given up hope. She's in a terrible state, and I don't know what to do. So then it just dawned on me, just 2 weeks ago in Tishrei, I heard this detail that nobody else heard. And I said to her, find out what her nickname was as a kid. And have her family call her by her nickname. This woman's name is Irit Arnon. Her nickname was Cookie. 2 hours later, I get a phone call. Rabbi Appell, you're not going to believe it. We called her Cookie, and she woke right up out of her coma and asked for a cup of water.
Wow.
And since then, she's been on a few world cruises. So every detail of a Hasidic story can save a person's life. Just that one detail got this woman out of a coma. So you can never underestimate the impact of even a detail in a story. And the same is true with everything in life. Any questions?
I have one question. You were speaking about different types of miracles. Nature, the human body, abnormal to nature. But then you moved to speak about technology and people doing miracles. And maybe someone might argue that this is not necessarily a humbling kind of miracle, because it doesn't necessarily come from God. Somebody can come and say, yeah, we are so smart, we made a technological miracle. We are so smart,
Well, it's true. There is such a concept. In Hebrew, it's called Ein Bal Nes Makir Beniso. The person who experiences the miracle doesn't even realize he's experiencing a miracle. But that's one of our tests, that's one of our challenges. That's why we say in the Modim prayer, as we pointed out, Al Nisecha Shebachol Yom Imanu, that we recognize Hashem, that you do miracles for us every single day, and Niflo Secha Bachol Eid, your wonders that you perform, Erev Avoker B'Tzorai, at night, in the morning, and in the afternoon. Meaning that that's our challenge, is to look for those things and to appreciate. In other words, when technology comes up with some magnificent discovery, the test is, do I appreciate that God gave knowledge to that person, that God gave this research team the ability to break through and come up with this, world effective, solution? Now, the truth is, as we said, that much of science is still humbling because, as I said, only 5% of the universe is observable. So even scientists are realizing that they haven't even scratched the surface. So anybody who really studies the human body and technology and science should be able to see that there's a vast amount that we don't know. For everything that we find out, there are untold things that we discover that we don't know anything about. So that's our challenge. That's exactly our challenge. God always leaves you with the free choice. Right? You can see the miracle or you can see it as nature. That's for us to choose. That's where our free choice comes in. But what we can say is that Hanukkah gives us a greater sensitivity. It gives us the ability to, throughout the year, to appreciate these different levels of miracles in our lives. And develop the eyes to be able to appreciate it. Right? If you see a child take his first step, that's a miracle. Why did it happen now? What happened biologically? We can't explain it, but he took his first step. He said his first word. There's a certain sensitivity that you develop.
Anybody else?
Hello. Thank you for all these inspiring stories. They're really appreciated here. At the expense of reading your parade, I have a question here. It's an open-minded question.
Sure.
So that you question anything in a bad sense. All these miracles are really impressive. what happens to the myriad of cases when, despite the person's innocence and the objective cleanliness of the situation, Hashem doesn't come through and the miracle doesn't happen? How can that be explained?
Well, if you remember, like the story I mentioned with this fellow on the bus and the taxi, there's a much bigger picture than what we see. And we know there are many tragedies, and the Jewish law requires us to mourn. Nobody says to be happy when a young child passes away, because on the surface, it's anything but a miracle. But at the same time, we know that there's a grand master, there's a plan, there's something much more beyond what we see, which I mean, I can tell you hundreds of stories of reincarnations of people that had to come for a short amount of time and they had to fix this or that. Now again, that doesn't necessarily mean that we could rejoice. No, we see it as a tragedy. And that's not a miracle, but as in the story that I mentioned about this fellow in the taxi, when you understand that even what's a tragedy is part of a huge kind of network of God's providence in this world, it makes it at least something that you can deal with, something that you can understand as part of a much bigger picture. And that itself gives you a certain kind of consolation. Now we know that when the redemption comes, and this is something that the Chafetz Chaim says, just like the brothers looked at Joseph last week, when we were talking about just yesterday, I say last week, it's hard to imagine, I was just in shul yesterday in Jerusalem, but they were looking at Joseph, and they see the enemy, they see tragedy, they see misfortune, they see a threat to their whole existence. And who were they looking at really? Their Savior. They were looking at their brother. They were looking at their closest of kin. They were looking at the person who was ultimately going to save the world and his own family. So sometimes we don't have the eyes to perceive it yet. So the Chafetz Chaim says that when Mashiach comes, when redemption comes, all of a sudden all those things that we saw as being tragic and negative, all of a sudden it's all going to click in one instant. Just like when Joseph says, I'm Joseph. I'm not your enemy. I'm your brother. And then all of a sudden, oh, why didn't you tell us? But the irony is that they're looking at him in the face and they can't see it.